Now, you probably all know the people sitting on either side of me, so I'm not going to spend lots of time introducing them all. You know who they are and where they're from, and if you don't, it's in the program. But I will tell you a few really important things about them. Geoff is a stayer. So Geoff went to work at the Australian Drug Foundation on leave without pay from the Health Department in 1991. He's still there. So either he loves it or, you know, he just doesn't like moving very much. Nick, I kind of feel like I'm consorting with the enemy here because he tells me that the first member of his family to arrive in Australia founded a pub. And we've got a bit of a theme going on because Sharyn at the end actually did her PhD in wine retailing. And so her previous life was about trying to sell as much wine as she could to people at a higher price. And Kristy, who has a fantastic Twitter name, I should have told you in case you don't already know, Geoff is at Geoff Munro. Nick is, I'm going to spell this because it's not going to sound right, at NNICCC. Sharyn is at Rundle-SR. And Kristy is Zockmelon, which is really cool, which is, I don't know if you agree with this, but I do. She was looking for a health-related and techie-sounding name, and she had a toddler who couldn't say rockmelon. So she's at Zockmelon, so I love that. So what we want to do today, none of our speakers are going to do presentations. They're going to answer your questions, the questions that we have on Twitter. And I have some spare questions here just in case you're all really, really silent. So I'm going to start our panel out with one of the first questions that we did get in response to our call for questions on Twitter, which is, and I'll go with Geoff, how can we engage those outside the alcohol and drug sector in positive social marketing on alcohol?
People outside the drug sector, I think we need to spend more time educating the population about digital literacy. This is something we talked about in a session yesterday, and I think that young people in particular are very adept at providing their personal information online and giving away a lot to corporate brands of all types, and I guess we're very concerned about the way in which alcohol brands use that data. And I think one thing we can do for the whole population is to improve people's digital literacy and help them understand the way their data gets used online.
Okay, does anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the first thing you really need to do is say, well, what are people outside the alcohol and drug sector talking about online, or if they're not talking about things, what are they doing with online technologies, and how can we go and find them in their everyday lives and join in with their everyday practices, because that's the place where you engage people as part of what they already talk about, as part of what they already do, and then figure out what are the ways to get from that point to what you think is important and what you want to talk about. If you talk about what you're already interested in as a sector, it won't flow beyond the boundaries of your online networks. And I think one of the things we have to contend with in a new media system is that just the way of the architecture of an online system creates little bubbles of interest. A broadcast democracy meant that, with television or newspapers, a society was more or less having the one conversation because everyone read the same newspaper or watched the same TV station in the evenings. But in an online system, we can more and more be clustered within little groups of like-minded people talking to each other in a little bubble. And so you have to figure out ways to get yourself into other bubbles, basically.
Okay, I think
my biggest point here, if we want to engage people outside of our sector, we actually have to start speaking to them in a way that they listen. Because at the moment, a lot of campaigns speak to people, you're speaking to the converted, people who are already highly motivated, engaged and listening. If you talk about alcohol, most people sitting around a dinner table drinking wine will look at me and tell me, we don't have a problem. They don't understand standard drinks. They don't understand what the concept of binge drinking is and how much. And they're over here and we're trying to talk to them over here. So we've got to get into their terminology and then start to engage them. And the thing I'm going to challenge you with, what do the big boys do? They make people laugh. They engage. They use humour, sometimes a bit of other emotions. And a lot of the messaging I see in the safe and no drinking space doesn't have any of that at all. So we've got to start playing like the big boys play.
Thank you. Does anyone have any... I've got more questions here, but I'm sure people in the room have questions. Oh, come on. We should have had jelly beans or Smarties or something for questions.
Thanks, Geoff. Lee Greenaway. Righto, can you give me an example of how you think we might do that? This is putting you back on the spot, I know, of how are we going to make people laugh about standard drinks? I have to say my mind's boggling.
In short, you can do messaging without even saying it at all. So you've got to start to get very clever about the message that you're conveying and how you start to put that across. So when I speak later on today at 11 o'clock, I'll share some examples from some of the work that we've done where we're messaging without even actually saying it at all. So we've got to be a little bit cleverer, much like the corporate advertisers are, in unpacking it, getting the insight, and then coming out with the message to actually say so.
Sometimes it's actually talking about the product less, so talk about the alcohol less and talk more about the post-alcohol identities or post-consumption identities you're trying to build and engage with and support or empower. And sometimes we talk too much about the problem in our messaging rather than using the messaging to try to solve the problem. And so that's a kind of, we get off on the wrong foot, I'd say.
I think we have another question over there.
Yes, my question's about older people and the split older population, some who tweet on Facebook and some who don't. And we know that in Australia there's a growing problem. It's probably actually not so much growing, but has existed for a while for older people with medication mismanagement and alcohol issues combined. What would you see as a good strategy to engage with older people around the issue, not just of standard drinks, but understanding, safe drinking, etc.?
So when I'm doing social media workshops with people in health promotion, people are always really concerned, well, what about the ageing population? And yes, sure, we know that there's, some older people who have iPads and they're have the fastest uptake of tablets and buying tablets and that sort of thing. So we do know that there are plenty of older people who are using technology, and I think that actually gives us a huge opportunity to use social media, and in particular platforms like Facebook, where older people are, and if they are going to be using social media, it will be on Facebook. And because their social media noise might not actually have as much noise on their newsfeed as maybe somebody who's younger, who's been on Facebook for 10 years, it might actually give us more opportunity to cut through in that space. So one point is, one size isn't going to fit all, and there'll be plenty of older people who aren't using technology, but for those who are, it actually does give a huge opportunity for us to communicate with people in that space, and it might actually be a welcome place for older people to receive information and messages, and I think that that's actually something we can look at, and I think it's an opportunity for research as well to see what messages might work on social media versus not on social media for those particular population groups who maybe some are and some aren't on social media.
I'll make a comment about that. I know in the adolescent health field, a lot of applications are being developed for young people, and for young people to give almost some biofeedback to monitor their mental health status in a real-time sense. And I wonder whether it may be a task for the health field to develop some applications that might induce older people to engage more with social media. Maybe we should be thinking about how we can encourage that. And provide the applications that make sense to them. So I think that's possibly a research project, but also a very creative task that we might set people in our field. And so rather than ask older people for them to sort of change, we actually make it easy for them to do so. So we give them the tools, and so it becomes sensible from their perspective. So we give them the tools to engage rather than asking them to pick it up when they perhaps aren't feeling comfortable with it or aren't quite sure how to know how to do it.
Thank you. We have a couple of other Twitter questions. Oh, sorry, I'll let Nick add first.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question to ask about older people, and the thing that I think more and more about is that older people are also all nearly carrying smartphones now and it's their family members or their kids maybe getting the smartphone or they got it themselves. But I think it's interesting to think about how they use and adapt to technologies on that device. So they might not be the ubiquitous user of Facebook or Instagram, but something you notice is when there's an app that does something helpful and useful for them, they use it all the time. Now, my mum would be really irritated for me calling her an older person in this, so no one go and tell her I used her as an example. But I've noticed that when we show her how to use an app that is useful, like for sharing photos of my son, that she will use it all the time. They're religious users of it. So I imagine if you can think of an app that does something useful around standard drinks and medications, and then think about who would show the target market how to use it. Is it a GP? Is it a health practitioner? Is it a younger family member? And get them to introduce and show the app to them. Then if the app's useful, they'll go back again and again and again. Once they're using it like that, then you can think about ways they might share it out into their networks, which may or may not be online.
Thanks, Nick. I'll just do these quick Twitter questions and then I'll come to the gentleman there. One of our questions is, would anyone on the panel comment on alcohol companies' use of Facebook? And I'm going to hold that question and I'm going to suggest you all come to Nick's session later this morning because he will tell you a lot about alcohol companies' use of Facebook. Another question is, what have been the most effective health and social campaigns in the alcohol space? I would just point out that there's probably not very many. I can think of lots of really unsuccessful ones that come to mind, like most of the government ones, like Drinking Nightmare and Drinking Choices, which tend to just try and scare people by telling them things they already know. And I can also say that we know that industry campaigns don't work, unless depends on your metric, because if your metric is to get people to drink, they probably work really well. But that's an excellent question for the rest of the panel. Does anybody know of any really effective, particularly in the online space, safe drinking campaigns or responsible drinking campaigns?
I can have a go at two that are perhaps a little bit left field, one particularly left field. But one I've become aware of in the last year or so is the Australian Breastfeeding Association have a really wonderful app for thinking about drinking and breastfeeding, right? And what I've noticed about the use of this app, so it's an app where you tell the app how many drinks you plan on having, like I'm going to have a glass of wine, when would it be safe for me to breastfeed next? So it gets an uptake because it's useful for mothers in trying to figure that out. But what I've discovered just watching, because it's something that's happening in my peer group a lot at the moment, is often the use of this app stimulates all sorts of interesting conversations around a dinner table about alcohol consumption and children and breastfeeding and whatever. So the app, in offering a useful service, generates probably all these really interesting conversations. I'm not sure the Australian Breastfeeding Association necessarily saw the app as having those kind of flow-on effects, but I think it does, and I think that could be leveraged even more. And I think there's a lesson in that around other sorts of everyday interactions where you could just go and intervene in them somehow. And the other one is not alcohol at all, but sometimes, I'm thinking about this more and more at the moment, is who's wearing a Fitbit at the moment, right? I think this is a kind of, this is a sort of an alcohol behaviour change sort of technology in the way that it prompts us to reflect on our behaviours in all sorts of ways around the management of the healthiness of our body. And I just wonder if Fitbit users are, by default reflecting on their alcohol consumption as well, even though that's not something Fitbit are trying to do.
This may be a nice opportunity, Sandra, just to remind people that teenagers are drinking less than ever before, according to the latest data, and that's a trend that's been taking place now for at least a decade, and we need to keep reminding each other and our broader networks about that. But perhaps the relevance here is nobody knows quite why teenagers are reducing their drinking, so fewer teenagers are drinking, although those that are drinking are still drinking in very large quantities. One of the sort of the theory that's been put forward to explain this is that a lot of people now, young people, are online and they're spending much more time looking at their screens and interacting online, and perhaps they have less space or social space for the sorts of interactions that often include drinking. Now, opposed to that, Nick, and you may be talking about it later on, is of course the theory that alcohol brands are leveraging online means to encourage young people to drink. So it looks like there may be two counteracting, trends there. But I think this is an issue that we need to keep in mind and perhaps obviously aware of and keep researching. But I think we should remind ourselves that not all is doom and gloom on the alcohol front. That there are some nice trends, and we need to find ways of encouraging those trends to continue.
Thank you. The gentleman there has been very patient.
Thank you. Is this on? Ben Norris from Queensland Health. My question is about tackling alcohol fuel violence. There's a number of jurisdictions in Australia now, government jurisdictions, that are starting to address this issue. Just wondering what your thoughts are around utilising apps which maybe might use the location, the GPS sort of function, to allow for more sort of direct marketing, if you like. Because there's a number of, certainly in Queensland we have, safe drinking precincts, and I think in other states there are as well, so there's quite targeted activity, in those kind of locations. I'm not sure what the current situation is here in Queensland, but certainly under the previous government, certain individuals who had breached certain conditions were effectively banned from coming into those locations again. But from a more kind of flip side of that coin, I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to exploit that potential of smartphone apps and so on to allow for better direct targeted marketing.
I think there's definitely potential if we look at how well industry does it. So particularly in terms of, fast food does this really well. There are a whole lot of companies that do have exactly that happening. So, you'll notice if you drive past McDonald's, you will often get something appear on your phone telling you about the deals that are on offer at McDonald's this week. So it can be done. Nick's going to give us some advice on how we can do it better.
Yeah, I can tell you how the industry do it, and there's no reason why public health can't do it exactly the same way. So if you identified a particular precinct as connected with alcohol-related violence by a particular group of people at a particular time of the day or night or week, the question you need to answer is how do those people make themselves visible in an online network at that day and time? And that's how you find them. So if you figured out that your target market was posting photos to Instagram under a particular hashtag when they're out in a precinct or at an event, or were checking into certain venues on Facebook that they were attending in that precinct, or whatever else, there are an endless list of things people do on their apps quite ritualistically in these spaces that make them very identifiable. Now, what the industry does is target based on those interactions. So it says, send this piece of promotional content to anybody who checks in at this venue between these hours on this night. There's no reason why public health can't target in much the same way. It's a completely open platform that Facebook and Instagram offer as part of their ad product. It's just about the question that you've got to answer, which the industry is really good at answering, is where and when do these people make themselves visible at the right moment in these precincts, and when do we intervene with them? Do you know what I mean? And you can get creative. Like, you can think of anyone who mentions the word taxi on Instagram between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. on a Saturday night. We're going to target them with this piece of content because probably they've been out in a precinct or something like that. I don't know. But that's how the industry do it, and that's how we should do it too.
Do we have more questions? Back there.
I've been working with Hello Sunday Morning a little bit, and their use of Instagram is really interesting. They created a hashtag called Hello Sunday Morning, and they've spent over a year or two really encouraging their network to post their own images to Hello Sunday on a Sunday morning of whatever they're doing, using that hashtag. So it generates a kind of conversation around a hashtag and a new hashtag. Like what they're finding, of course, is people are just using the hashtag sometimes to begin with, unaware of the connection back to Hello Sunday Morning, which Hello Sunday Morning can help people discover, because once you prompt people to do something on a Hello Sunday Morning, you've made them visible, which means that then you can kind of retarget them back through their Facebook and Instagram networks with your own links to your own site, your own products, your own apps, and so on. So that activity helps them kind of follow up more networks and generate more participation in their apps.
Thank you. I actually have a question here for Kristy, who's representing practitioners in Queensland here on our panel. How ready do you think the health promotion workforce is for using social media in their practice? What's the uptake been like from organisations?
So my answer to that is, I work with organisations in providing professional development, and my general answer from working directly with people and also my observations of different types of organisations is that it really depends wildly on the size and resourcing of an organisation. So that's not really going to come as a great deal of surprise. So the difference being the larger organisations who have designated marketing and communication staff, and social media tends to be allocated to a marketing or comms area for organisations who have those teams and resourcing. They do pretty well. The smaller organisations do less well, and this is the organisations who don't have that level of resourcing, where social media is a dot point on somebody's job description. And this is where I think that there's probably the vast majority of organisations, there's a high number of organisations who fall into that category, purely based on my observations, because there's so many small organisations who feel like that, or who either have some social media presence or don't yet but feel they should, or have something but don't have a strategy. And this is, I think, where there's a bit of a missed opportunity for providing some support and additional resourcing and capacity for those organisations to help them to know what they're doing a little bit more, because social media is a learned skill. It's a competency, and it's actually increasingly a core competency for people working in the health space, because everybody expects there to be a social media presence for every business or organisation. So it's almost no longer sufficient just to have a web presence. So I think every organisation would have some sort of website or web presence, but in addition to that, a social media presence of some description, and typically a Facebook page is generally expected as well. So, and there's my feeling is that there's just generally under-resourcing, stress, lack of capacity within organisations to know how to manage that, because for lots of organisations this has come up very quickly and it can be a bit of an afterthought. So I think that it's a major capacity issue in the broader public health sector.
Okay.
I'm conscious Sandra, can I just point out that this digital native beside me is checking his Twitter account while we're sitting here between comments. He probably doesn't even know he's doing it.
Sandra, I have a question over here before you go on, if that's okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Sandra. Just a quick question, and Geoff Munro is probably sweating that I'm going to be asking this, but I'd like to get the opinion of all the panel. When we talk about social media and social marketing, Kristy touched on yesterday a few key points, but I'd like to hear what the panel think about what they believe the key points are of those two, in between social media and social marketing. And in addition to that, where can AOD advocates seek help on current AOD social media and social marketing in Australia? Go, Geoff.
I'm happy for someone else to kick off.
All right. Okay, well, I'll start with the statement that social marketing and social media are fundamentally different concepts. And I think for people in both of those areas, that confusion is really, really annoying when we try to talk about what we do. So Sharyn will probably have something to say about this in a moment. Sharyn, like me, is a social marketer. Social marketing is a discipline. It's about understanding our consumers. It's about developing interventions that address consumer needs. It could be done in any medium. It could be, it could have no media involved in it at all. It could be done at a completely community level. All kinds of things. Social media is social media. Social media is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those other things. And I would say that the vast majority of people don't get that distinction, and it becomes really difficult if you're trying to pitch a project or get funding for something or convince an organisation to do something, and you say, we want to run a social marketing intervention, and they say, oh, like on Facebook. So, Sharyn, you probably have...
Sandra sums it up well. It took me 4 years at Griffith University to convince the upper senior management that social marketing is not Facebook. I kept saying social marketing, and I heard Facebook coming back. Marketing is understanding consumers and delivering a solution to meet their needs and wants. It's all about awareness, trial, and then repeated use. So for us in marketing, it's about things like satisfaction and retention. And marketing's not just communications. So when we speak about social marketing, it's about creating that mix that people want.
Can I just add something as well? I just want to... what I want to actually add to that discussion is what social media is. And I think, like that, people think of social media as the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Now, my take on this is that if you think about the internet these days, if you really think about the internet, almost everything on the internet has a social aspect to it. Almost every website, very rarely do you find a website that doesn't have any kind of way that you can in some way interact with that website. Be that a website with a blog with comments or even a news site where you can add comments. There's always social media is any kind of web presence that's two-way and participatory. Almost every presence on the internet is social. So if you're starting to think less about social media platforms and more about social elements on the internet, almost everything apart from maybe, anything secure like internet banking. There's always some aspect on any kind of web presence where it's expected that there's two-way communication there on there. So just thinking, I guess, reframing a little bit about what social media is and thinking how now that's just an expected, embedded way that we use the internet.
Okay. I'm conscious of the time, and I'm going to use my capacity as chair to have the last question, because this is one that plagues me, and so I'm hoping that our panel will be able to fix it for me. The title of our session was about playing with the big boys, and as someone who is fairly active, particularly on Twitter, one of the things that I discover is I was taught as a little kid, I think this comes from sport, play the ball, not the player, and nobody taught the industry that. So what I find being in those spaces is I try to use it very professionally and tweet our research findings and talk about what's happening in the community, and certain people in the industry use it as a really good platform to be able to be really mean, and there's really no other word for it, to get really personal and say horrible things about you in a way that they wouldn't get away with in any other environment. And I think that deters a lot of people from actually engaging in those spaces, because the risk of putting your head up over the parapet and having it blown off, it can really hurt some of the things that come back. So I'd like our panel to give us their take on, if you're going to play with the big boys, how do you keep yourself safe?
Well, Sandra, I don't think we can afford to adopt those tactics. So my particular interest is in the way in which, for example, alcohol brands leverage their sponsorship of sport through social media. And I think on a slightly different tack, one of the things we might want to do at some stage is to engage with the sports, to point out how the sports are exploited by alcohol brands, because the alcohol brands are not interested in the sport. They're interested in the audience that is attached to the sport. So if chess was a spectator sport, VB would be fighting to sponsor chess. It doesn't actually care about the football or the cricket. And I think one way of not playing the alcohol brands' games is that we will need to engage with the sports at some stage and make the argument that they are being exploited and the brands are seeking to exploit their audience and are damaging the audience for the sport.
But what do you do when you post that on Twitter and someone from the industry comes back and says, but Geoff Munro is a boring old man with no friends and that's why he doesn't like alcohol?
Look, I just think we need to develop that thick skin because we cannot afford to engage like that. We all know we talk about being evidence-based, and so we have to remain evidence-based and point out that the industry, when they report that I am a boring old man, that is not evidence-based.
The thing I think, there are two things I think about it here, and one is that when you're being trolled by the industry online, it's different to other kinds of trolls. This is a professionalised kind of trolling, and in some respects it's no different to the PR tactics industries like these have used for 50 and 60 years, which is, you know, the smear and smokescreen type tactics. It's just using the same old playbook on a new media. But I think one of the things I'm a little bit interested in is how other people and other groups have responded to trolls, and particularly the way in which, say, feminist activists have responded to trolls online by just creating blogs that catalogue the things these people say. And then those blogs have got huge traction. So I don't know, as a particularly visible example, a couple of years ago during a Wimbledon final, a few feminist activists went and catalogued every sexist thing said about the players by young men and blogged them on a Tumblr, and that generated more story or more attention than the trolls did themselves. And sometimes I think that you don't have to engage with them, but there perhaps is something to be gained by cataloguing and making visible what they say, because often you're getting the abuse, but other people aren't seeing how they're behaving.
Thank you.
The thing I would add to that, I think that's a really good example, that I think that this is a professional issue for public health, and particularly the people who are on Twitter tend to be the peak bodies and the public health researchers. And I think that it's a professional safety issue for the people who maybe are on the fence about whether or not they want to speak out or be involved or put themselves out there. And I think that it probably calls for some additional resources and support for how to manage that. So there's some examples of people in public health who, like Simon Chapman, if you read some of his work around how he's been trolled online as a public health researcher and anti-tobacco researcher, and his work around wind farms, and so he's working in controversial spaces, and his take is that we all need to grow big, thick rhinoceros hides. But I think that that's part of it. But I do think that we are still human, and it can still be very nerve-wracking to put yourself out there on an individual space. It's not as bad if you're from an organisation, although there's obviously potentially some risks for the organisation as well. But I think that it calls for a collective discussion about how researchers and public health professionals and public health-based organisations can be supported to engage in meaningful and safe ways.
Sharyn.
I think as a final aside, I agree a little bit with Geoff. We have to talk from our evidence base. But here's the business side. Any press is good press. The fact that they're actually being negative and saying derogatory, horrible things like boring old man actually says that the nerve's been hit. You've actually fired a bullet that's hit. And you have to view it that way, take it as a very big positive, and then just be true and authentic. Very professional. And to some extent, most times, I would not engage at that low, dirty, tactical level because it's best not to.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Geoff, Nick, Kristy, Sharyn, and thank you all. I'm sure people have lots of other questions that they didn't ask, so you have everybody's names and Twitter IDs, so send them your questions if you still have some, or grab people on the tea break and ask them. So thanks very much for contributing.